Welcome to a special, spooktacular episode of GeekBros.com. Ooh. I'm your host, Kung Fu Sanders, and this is my co-host, Chico, I believe, from the famous Five Nights at Freddy's video game series. So we're not really brothers this week, but we got some dope costumes. Anyways, what our schedule for today is, we're going to be talking about the Apple and Microsoft announcements. Recently they had a few events where they released, at least showed off new hardware, so that'll be really interesting to talk about. And then second thing we're going to talk about today is the death of Vine. Vine was a kind of like a social media app where basically anyone could upload like a very short clip and it just kind of loops over and over again. And the last thing we'll be diving into today is going to be about video games. So we're going to be talking about some kind of our favorite Halloween themed video games, as well as the continuing topic of microtransactions and what it means, how it's evolved over time, and I guess what we think about it now. Okay, so first topic of the day, the Microsoft and Apple press events for showing off their new hardware. So why don't you go ahead and get into the Apple side of things, Chica?
Yes, so after this show, Colonel Kung Fu Sanders is going to kill me and fry me. That's why
that is true. I just now realized our costumes almost kind of go together.
So so that's why we're wearing the costumes that we are. So so the Microsoft and Apple event this week, everybody's been talking about it. Everybody has their opinions, but I'm going to start off with the Apple event. If you are anything interested in technology, everybody knows that the Apple event every year is a pretty big deal, but like being a geek, I don't really find them that exciting. And Apple does this on purpose, because they don't have to do anything quote unquote revolutionary. A lot of Apple events, they're more, and I've said it before in other videos, they're more iterative, more like these little updates. And increasingly, every event that they have shown here recently, they are actually taking away features, instead of adding more features. And so this event, it really wasn't much. I mean, they finally made an update to their MacBook Pro line. I think the last time it was updated was like in 2013, so it's been quite a while. And the only real thing that I saw that was really, to me, was really different, and I thought that it's definitely something I would like, is the actual touch bar. Like having a secondary OLED screen that's digital, that's nothing new. And I go back to the phone, the LG V20 and the LG V10, they have an OLED screen on top. But in terms of it being in a laptop, I think this might be the first one. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in some other not as known laptops, but even then, for good reason, right? Because maybe it's not really a game changer, at least to me. And the interesting point about that is initially the biggest issue I see with that is kind of, retraining yourself for that kind of feedback, right? Because if I heard correctly, they took out the escape key.
Oh, yeah. That's not good.
So the escape key isn't an actual physical key anymore. It's going to be part of that touch bar. So, and on top of that, I wonder if it won't have any kind of vibration or kind of haptic feedback, will it? It won't let you know when you've touched the button. It's just kind of like a flat, glassy surface.
Not that I know of.
Yeah. So that's, I guess, I don't know. To me, it's not exciting, whatsoever. If anything, it makes it a little more cumbersome because, I can't really see any context where that would really be useful. For example, if you're watching a movie or something, maybe you can use it to scroll back and forth, right? To kind of scrub back and forth. I don't know, listen to music, you can use it to play, pause, whatever. But again, to me, it's, at least with your phone, you're kind of looking at it while you're using it, right? But with this, you gotta look down. It's kind of distracting you away from the screen. So I don't know. That's my initial thoughts on it.
Yeah, and initially before this was released, a lot of people were speculating, and I kind of thought, what's the big deal? But then when I saw the actual application of it, for example, it is application specific. So if you were to go to Final Cut Pro, it would change the way it looks, like the features available. So, you could use it, to go to a fast forward or go to different parts of your timeline. those type of functionality, it makes sense. And like I said, it is application specific. So I myself, I can see the value of it, whether or not it's a game changer. I don't think it's a game changer, but I'm positive that other laptop manufacturers are going to adopt this because I can see the value in having that. And especially later on when developers get a hold of it, and maybe when it gets to other platforms like Windows or even Linux, that you can customize what is available on that top bar, then I could see the real value in it, in terms of like usability, Now, another reason I think they did this is because, and this is my opinion, for the longest time, Apple is very resistant, or maybe not resistant, but they time the features that they're going to have. And, fortunately or unfortunately, other platforms and other manufacturers already have those features for a long time. So they let them do all the beta testing. Case in point, touchscreens on your laptop. Why has Apple not put it in there? It just makes complete sense. And you get like really low-end Windows machines that have that feature. Why won't Apple do that? And I think, obviously, it's for monetary reasons. They could easily do it. But if they did that, then why would you buy their app or their iPads? You have to buy two separate things. Whereas in the Windows world, they have their yoga tablets and their hybrid, which allows you to have two different forms of using your device, two different types of devices all in one, And I think that's why they're doing it. And I think like maybe next year they will finally introduce the revolutionary touchscreens, which have been around for a while. But, I will say one thing about Apple. When they do finally introduce their version of it, it's usually pretty solid. They actually did think about it before they did it. So, but in terms of like, on this press event, the only other thing that they introduced was a new iOS TV app, which doesn't have Netflix, which is crazy, and it doesn't have Amazon. Obviously they're doing this because they want to have the Apple ecosystem with all Apple-related things. Mm-hmm. So, I wasn't impressed by it myself. I mean, I really do think the touch bar is valuable, but is it valuable enough to where you can spend $1,300 on a laptop that has a 2-year-old, the processor is a Core i5, and it has an integrated graphics chip, It's like, it's not a powerhouse by any means. And at that price, I keep going back to the whole branding of Apple. They have such a powerful brand, that people will buy it, So that's my thoughts. I wasn't really excited at all about it. I do like the touch bar though, but I don't think it's worth that much money,
And again, I mean, I guess you could kind of equate it back to kind of like the original iPod scroll wheel, right? It was useful in that sense. But even then, like navigation and stuff, we've gone beyond that with touchscreens, right? Yeah, so the same thing with this. It's kind of like, to me, going a little bit backwards. The only kind of useful context it would work in is kind of, like you said, scrubbing back and forth between the video,
Yeah.
Or where some kind of dial would be useful, which would be a good segment into the Microsoft announcements, actually. So, if you haven't seen it, Microsoft, they recently announced I would say the big one was like the Surface Pro Studio, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And so the Surface Pro Studio is like a big 29, 30-inch 4x3, basically an oversized version of the Surface Pro tablets, but, for your desktop. Definitely for all the digital artists, graphic designers out there. And yeah, essentially it's just a really big Surface Pro that you can kind of tilt back and forth, right? So you can tilt it upright and use it like a regular monitor, or you can tilt it, more down and flat surface so you can actually do your drawings onto it. And the interesting with that is like they also announced the accessory, right? The dial.
The Surface dial.
Yeah. So I can see how that would be useful, and it's actually kind of similar maybe to even that bar that Apple introduced, right? Rather than being like kind of a linear search bar, this is more of like a radio, but in essence, they do the same thing, right? Go left or go right.
It actually has more functionality than that.
Yeah, right. I know, but I mean, like for all intents and purposes, like that's what it, like if we break it down to like the kind of input it gives, right? You basically just go left or right. Maybe there's some touch on there. But the crazy thing about the Surface, I'm going to call it a hockey puck, is that does actually have haptic feedback. So, say you're using it as a dial, you can actually feel like the clicks, even though there's like no physical click. You could I guess it'll vibrate, just enough to make it seem like a real click. Yeah, so what do you think about the Surface Pro Studio? And maybe even if you want to make a comment on kind of like Apple exiting like the desktop segment and Microsoft kind of coming in and taking over.
Yeah, I don't say this very often. I love Linux, but I mean, I love technology in general, so I'm not like biased on one platform or other. But there are certain things that I like and that I don't like with each respective platform. And for Microsoft, I'm not going to lie, most of the times their events are boring. For their computing events. I'm not talking about their Xbox events. But this one, I am not going to lie, I was absolutely blown away. I mean, Microsoft really, really brought the big guns. The Surface Studio was something I was extremely impressed with. I mean, it was surprising. I didn't know about it. Now, obviously, Microsoft isn't the only one who has an all-in-one desktop solution. But this Surface Studio, I've never seen it done in this way. Not only does it have a beautiful 28-inch, and I'm positive this is a 4.5K resolution.
Yep.
It's not quite the 5K of the Apple all-in-one, but because of the way they designed it, they didn't put all the components like most manufacturers do in the screen, which allows the screen to be extremely, extremely thin. They put all of it in the base.
As well as better thermals as well. So like the screen itself can get hot.
Because it's not the heat up in the screen, and since it is in the base, they are able to add, in my opinion, more powerful hardware in the base. If I'm not mistaken, you could get an Intel Core i7 plus an NVIDIA graphics card, plus you can get it up to 2 terabytes in their 32 gigs of RAM. So although it might not be great, I mean, the best for the hardcore gamers, it would definitely be enough for pretty much everybody's computing needs.
Yeah. So for normal computing, and there's some caveats on the hardware too. So one, like the processor is going to be I'm pretty sure it's going to be a laptop processor. Two, the video card's actually a mobile video card as well, and it's an older one. In fact, it's like last generations. I believe it's maybe 960. It's either the 950 or 960M. And then the third thing is a hard drive isn't even a true SSD. It's actually a hybrid drive, which is part SSD but then part HDD. So you look at the price point for it, and I think it starts at like $2,900.
Yeah, it's $3,000.
Yeah, and then like the high end ends around $4,000 if I'm not mistaken.
But if you think about it, this is really geared towards the designers. And if you are a designer, you've probably got a lot of expensive Apple equipment. So $3,000, if you are a designer, I think it's extremely reasonable at that price point.
Yeah.
And at the same time, if you look at an equivalent Apple all-in-one 5K display, you're going to be spending that much or more and get less. And I love the Surface Dial accessory along with the pen. It works really well. I mean, just by looking at the demos, I was extremely, and I love the hinge. I mean, it's just, it makes sense. Now, in my opinion, the way that they designed it, maybe not this first version, having everything in the module, on its own module at the bottom, I could easily see in the future they can make this upgradable. You know what I mean? Since it is its own module, and that would even increase its value even more. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I guess going back to the hardware real quick, I actually would be a little bit concerned with a 960M pushing that many pixels on the screen, right? Because this is not your average 1080 screen. When you're exactly, but it's like 4 times the resolution, right? And you have like a pretty an older generation laptop video card at that. And when you're doing work with Photoshop, Illustrator, it does get pretty intensive if you're working at that resolution with multiple layers on layers on layers. So I'd be interested to see how the performance turns out. Even for video editing, might even be a struggle.
And I think one of the videos that I saw, they actually talked about that. They actually listened to the actual the unit to see if the processor was running really hard when they were running a game. And I think Microsoft and the people who developed it, they knew that would be an issue. But the Apple display has the same issue. All in one side.
Right. Yeah. And again, it's not really geared towards that market. It's more even like for like the home consumer, it's not really geared towards. It's gonna be more for like design studios, right, and actual companies where they can also use it as like a tax write-off. That's gonna be like stations for work, for professionals at work, and not really for home use. So,
yes,
and at that point the price doesn't matter because it's not geared.
Yes,
That's not the market that it's aiming towards. It's people trying to save money. These are for companies and corporations.
I mean, I myself, I was thoroughly impressed with the hardware. Okay, in terms of the software, Windows is making an update to a creator version of Windows 10, and I think that's really smart for them to do that because they're focusing on things such as 3D, VR, and 4K, which is basically where every content creation is going to end up in the next 2 years. So that was smart. I mean, me personally, I hope this type of hardware becomes more available, very similar. And then obviously they come down in price because I would definitely get it. I would put Linux on top of it. And as you know or may not know, Ubuntu they are working on a touch version of it. And in the future, we're going to see more Linux distributions that actually support touch.
Of course.
So I'm really, I cannot say enough how impressed I was by the hardware. And also, it wasn't just the Surface Studio. There was also an update to the Surface Book Pro line. And also, they introduced affordable VR. I was really surprised by that as well. $299. They're going to have other manufacturers make this. And the way I saw it, it only has one cable going to your machine, which is really cool. And at the same time, it has this new 6 degrees of motion in the headset. So that could mean that you could move around in the VR space without having to have a lot of physical space.
Right.
So I'm interested to see that as well. I'm not sure at that price point how good the resolution is going to be.
Yeah.
But if they could even give you like an almost good VR experience like the PlayStation VR, and with a single cable and at $300 and that works on their platform, I think a lot more people are going to be into that,
Yeah, if anything, it's going to drive down the cost of other VR headsets and put the pressure on them,
That's
like we said, the industry, or the VR industry is still really young, and so, all the competition that's coming in is only a good thing because it's only going to push other manufacturers.
Yep. Yeah. So, my overall thoughts, very impressed by Microsoft's events. I mean, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's really great to see Microsoft getting into like the high-end hardware segment. Before I guess it's really just like Apple dominated, where Microsoft was more on the OS software side, right? But now they're actually like pumping out their own hardware, and like I mentioned earlier, they're kind of taking a space that Apple really needs to have a monopoly over, which is kind of like the high-end desktop for designers space.
Yeah. And I like how you pointed that out though, because Apple, as a company, they've changed. Everybody knows that when Apple, years ago, they were more of the creative company, right? A lot of the first Apple hardware that I ever used, besides when I was in elementary, when I was in college, the first Apple machines I had, they had Adobe products, Premiere. They were meant for designers. They were workstations, right? But over the years, mainly because of the popularity of the iPod and then especially the iPhone, Apple has become more of a consumer-based company. A lot of their products are made for mass consumers. They still definitely have the design space, but not as much as it was before.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Apple, they're going to have to like step up their game before, other companies like Microsoft, and even in the smartphone space. Apple, iPhone represents 60% of their revenues. And now Google is coming in with the Google Pixel and many other companies. It's going to be, Apple's going to have to do some more, They're definitely going to have to. Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's some great hardware coming out from Microsoft, I think. And like you said, so from like the design perspective, right, before you had a reason to get a Mac because OS X, ran the design software the best. And now, even today, I hear a lot of people, they're in places basically just exclusively use PCs, instead of really any kind of Mac or OS X for like their design work. It's on par now, it's the same, if not better, on Windows for running these programs for like professional designers, modelers, and whatnot. So, we'll see if Apple tries to keep a compelling reason to really, go to them for like the high-end, the workstation desktops. Yeah.
And, that's not to say that Apple is like going to be losing their business anytime soon. They have like almost $300 billion in cash. They're not going anywhere. So they can afford to take their time, whereas other companies can't. But if you think about the long term, they're obviously a smart company, and so they know that this is coming. So I'm hoping that will improve their innovation. I want to see Apple come back to what it used to be, where they were an innovative company. They were introducing revolutionary technology, and I want to see that because I would hate, I don't like it when there's only a few companies doing stuff, and they're not competing. So this would be good to see.
Yeah, and we had mentioned it in a few episodes back of how like all these big companies are actually taking a lot of the same approach to things. Google, Amazon, Apple. They're all getting into the software space, the hardware space. Music, video. They're all trying to build their own ecosystems, and whether or not they, fail or succeed in some parts, right? So, for example, Microsoft, they tried getting into like the music space, the Zune. Just remember
that was
from a while back. Windows Phone, even, right? Amazon trying to get in with like the Fire phones and whatnot. They're all taking a stab at the same thing, and it seems like they're just throwing a lot of things at the wall and seeing what sticks. Yeah, but everyone, they have their eyes in the same places and the same prizes. So we just see the difference in execution, really. So soon enough, things will always be changing, I'm guessing. So maybe iPhones, the big thing for a decade or two, but maybe something else will come along and really dethrone them, and then maybe Apple will move into a different space. So it's always evolving, but it keeps it interesting for us, and as consumers, for the most part, more people, more hands in it, I think the better the outcome is.
Me too.
Whether or not to kind of like cement one company's foot in there, or to bring a new competitor, to take over it and dethrone something else. So any closing thoughts on the Apple or Microsoft events?
Nope. I was just really, like I said, surprised by Microsoft coming out the way they did. So it'll be exciting to see what happens.
Yeah. You guys definitely check out that Surface Studio trailer. That was a excellently well done trailer. The music was amazing. I really liked the choice.
Yeah, I thought I was watching an Apple ad, but it's pretty impressive.
Yep. All right, so ending on that note, we're going to be talking about the death of Vine. So for those of you who don't know, Vine is kind of a social media app that lets you upload short video clips. Spooky. So it lets you upload short video clips that really, I forgot how long they range, maybe anywhere from like 2 to 20, 30 seconds.
6 seconds.
6 seconds, even shorter. Okay, so 2 to 6 seconds. And basically just like a bite-sized chunk of, I would say, visual comedy. I would say that's like the main use for Vine was for, basically these bite-sized comedic things. But so why don't you go a little more into the death of Vine?
Yeah, and like my brother just mentioned earlier, things are constantly changing, and nowhere is that more, relevant than in the tech space. As much as we like to think technology is free, we're getting everything for free, we deserve everything for free. The reality is you need to make a profit in order to keep running your business, okay? And that is the reality that hit Vine. Now Vine, I think if I remember correctly, it really got into the scene in 2012, about 4 years ago. And the original founders of Vine, they were smart enough to sell themselves to Twitter for about $30 million. And so, don't feel bad for the founders. They're good. They're good.
Yep.
Now, Twitter, they cashed out. Now, Twitter, over the recent years, they've just been going this way. I talk about this a lot, is the whole business aspect of it, okay? They didn't not have a good business model with all the users that they had. They couldn't figure out a way to monetize their platform. And so the same thing was happening to Vine. Vine was just not able to figure out a way to monetize their platform. And they started going down themselves just these past few years. And now other competitors have picked up where Vine left off. For example, in my opinion, I think Vine was the first platform that allowed you to do short form video really quickly, okay? But obviously, you have other companies like Instagram that came in and allowed you to do 13-second. And now Snapchat, is huge. And I use Snapchat. And so there's a lot more competition coming out. And, Vine, number one, they didn't introduce anything new or forward thinking to combat these other competitors. And number two, both Instagram and Snapchat, they did a lot better job in monetizing their platform. Okay, so for example, Vine was against monetizing their platform for the longest time. And I'm sorry, you need advertisers to partner with you. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to sustain yourself. And that's what happened with Vine. And I've watched a couple of Vines. I'm not really the biggest fan of Vines, but they're obviously Snapchat was. I myself think that it had a lot of influence because of Vine. Okay,
yeah,
and so
definitely.
so I think I'm not as sad to see them disappear, because I wasn't a huge user, but I didn't really hear much about it, besides like we were saying comedy type loops, it'd be sad for the people who were on that platform, but I think the ones who were really using Vine as a way to earn a living, I think a lot of them saw that coming, so a lot of them have moved on to other platforms as well. So do you see anything else going on with Vine in terms of like the users or content and stuff like that?
Yeah, I would say definitely even like the format of the videos and maybe like kind of the connotation they create for itself. You can only do so many 6-second comedy videos before it gets, predictable, right? Whereas like you should look at the content that Snapchat produces. That's more insight into someone's life, right? So maybe more along the lines of Facebook, to see what your friends are doing, to see what's going on with your favorite celebrities, and to get that really like down to earth humanistic feel from it. Whereas Vine, it's just comedy, right? Like what else can you really showcase within that 6 seconds that's gonna make you interested and not get stale, because it's focusing more on like the skit rather than a person. And I feel like after a while, just the idea and the content, like it's not gonna go anywhere. And like you said, with these other platforms, you can do the same exact thing on those now if you really wanted to. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things that we're pretty successful for a couple years, but it doesn't have legs, especially with the business aspect of it, right? And maybe the difference is like in Snapchat, I saw that they were very quick to get the marketing in for that. I've been using it for maybe 2 or 3 years now, and I remember at some point there was like almost zero advertising on it, but slowly and surely it keeps on coming and coming and coming. And yeah, they're just a lot smarter about it, and they found like some pretty clever ways to do it too. So like in Snapchat, you can do like location-based filters, right? Which would be, like say if you're at like a Denny's or something, you can get a Denny's filter, and then all your friends would see that. And I'm not sure what kind of approach they could have done with Vine, for it to like really fit that medium of like short stories, right? So I mean, what is your take on that? Like if you were the CEO of Vine, what would be like your first avenue for advertising or some kind of marketing?
Well, one thing that I've learned being a content creator is that each platform has its own demographic, has its own advantages and disadvantages. Like for example, if you were creating content on YouTube and you took that same content and put it on Instagram, Periscope, Vine, Snapchat, it probably will not work because people in each platform, they are a different demographic and they expect different things. So that's one of the things that I noticed with the companies that are successful. They realize that. Like for example, with Snapchat, like you said, it's a story, a window into their lives, but at the same time, it has a more authentic feel,
Exactly.
Because with Snapchat, you don't have a lot of time. Like in YouTube, you can edit a lot of things, so you could present people with a life that looks the best, right? Whereas with Snapchat, you can't really do that because it's on the fly. You're doing it right there and then. And I think the people who run that company, they know that. And so a lot of things they seem very personalized and very real. And then, if you're using the Snapchat application, I know they have ads running, but the ads, they're not intrusive, and I know that they have analytics and metrics that they know what you're watching. And so it's very target marketed. And one of the other things I like they did is with the geo filtering. I don't use it myself. I don't want them to know everything about my location, but the filters that are added by these other companies who advertise on Snapchat, they're fun. They make sense. They're cool. I think Snapchat, they are aware of their audience, and then by adding that awareness, they put in advertising that makes sense.
Yeah, and you said it right there. Like the best thing about it is that it's non-intrusive. It's actually a part of the application about what makes it cool. So being able to find a way to make advertising cool, I haven't seen that done in quite some time. Because if you look at Facebook or Instagram, for the most part, I mean Facebook they got a little better at it, where they kind of incorporate it into like, your favorite companies posting it, right, or something like that. I mean it's still relevant to your interests, so you're not like 100% just dismissing it, but. Yeah, it's totally different for Snapchat because it's essentially like a limb or like the backbone or part of like the application and the experience itself. It's not shoehorned in, maybe is the best way to put it.
And another thing, and I think this is where the whole business side of the internet is heading. It's less about ads in your face, ads clicking everywhere. It's more about, let me show you things that might be useful or fun for your life. Because I think the newer, younger generation, your generation included, they are not.
My generation. See his hair?
Yeah, the KFC
Talking
generation.
About my generation.
They're not stupid. They know when they're being advertised and marketed to. So the challenge with going forward, if you are going to be doing any type of business online, is that you got to put your brand first. You got to gain people's trust first. And then your advertising is just a natural extension of the services that you're providing. And so that I think Snapchat does that well. And if you go down to the bottom of your Snapchat app, the news feeds that they have, they're really, they're not intrusive. I mean, they're actually interesting. You know what I mean? So I think Snapchat's doing a great job. Obviously, we're not sure exactly how much they are making or benefiting until they release their financials. But as far as I know,
it's a lot.
But as far as I know, they're not in trouble, financially, and who knows, maybe a company like Google might buy them up, or Amazon or any other big, or maybe Apple.
I don't think so. From what my friend had told me, like the CEO of Snapchat made I think all their employees read The Art of War to really be like that warrior combative, that warrior combative mindset. Like I'm pretty sure they don't want to be acquired. They're like.
Now, if I remember correctly, I don't know if it was Google or some other company did offer to buy them out for like $300 million a while back, but they refused.
Yeah.
So, but who knows? I mean, if Apple offers them $4 or $5 billion, I think. Yeah, or I mean, like remember WhatsApp, Facebook spent $12 billion on one app.
Yeah.
I could easily see Facebook offering billions of dollars for Snapchat,
Yeah, but even then, I feel like the thing about Snapchat is that the contents never get stale because it's powered by its everyday user, right? And when you find a way to make everyday things interesting, anyone can contribute. The barrier to entry is extremely low, and I feel like contents never get stale and people are always going to be interested. And
we'll see, the change is constant. What was hot one day is boring the next.
True.
So we'll see.
True.
So yes, for all you Vine users, sorry. RIP, R.I.P. to Vine.
R.I.P. Rip in peace.
Yeah, I mean, and it's fitting that it's happening around Halloween.
Maybe we'll be resurrecting as something else pretty soon. Kind of like a zombie Vine. Yeah.
Yeah, you're probably right. But you know what is interesting though? There's been rumors that Pornhub might. Has offered to buy Vine, which would be funny.
That makes sense.
Really?
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, I don't know, maybe... And I'm thinking this is kind of just like the general thing with a lot of social media nowadays is people's attention span is very, very short, right? So think about it, you're watching like some kind of pornographic film. I don't think everyone watches the whole way through, right? So the shorter they can get it, I don't know if they can figure out some way to capture the attention like that, and maybe I'll just put it out there. Like I think pornographic's probably timeless. It's been around forever. I don't think it's gonna go away anytime soon, right?
So sex is never going anywhere.
Yeah. So when you replace the content of a comedy with something like porn, I don't know, people are always gonna be interested into it. So.
Yeah, that makes more business sense than anything else. And if you see some of the most popular Vines, besides the actual comedy aspects, there's lots of booty, there's lots of boobs. Those are really high up there. So if this was really true, I could really see them making a ton of money off of it.
Especially if they buy it at an extremely low price, get their money's worth out of it. So yeah, we'll see. And like I said, that would not surprise me, and that actually I think makes a lot of business sense.
Yeah, and it does. And we're in a culture now where, at least here in the U.S., where pornography is not like the bad thing anymore. It's become part of this culture. I mean, even porno stars have become celebrities in their own right in the mainstream. And so it's not something that's taboo anymore. So if they were to buy them, it would make a lot of sense. And I think they would be more profitable if that happened.
Yeah, and we won't dive too deep into it. But yeah, I think even like a lot of these companies like Pornhub, they're getting heavily into basically targeted marketing, right? To figure out what you want and what you want to watch, and it's just another way for them to get more information on you to, sell you what you're into. So yeah, interesting. Anyways, RIP Vine. Yeah, I'm not gonna miss you really. I don't think. Yeah, sorry guys. You guys are, I don't know. I think you just lived up to your motto. You're interesting for about 6 seconds, and that's how I still feel about it. So.
Too bad.
Yep. RIP. Okay. Anyways, yeah, it's our last topic for this segment. We're gonna be talking about video games, and we're gonna go into a few different areas with that. We're gonna go with some Halloween video games, spooky video games, at least which ones that we really like in growing up in our past. And then maybe we'll go a little bit into kind of microtransactions and the state of that, because it's always changing, and games that come out every year, there's always some controversy about how they're going to monetize, right? And so it's actually even going to go into a little bit of our segment that we just mentioned about how advertisers market with social media. So let's talk about how developers, and I think more importantly publishers, monetize with video games. So yeah, let's start out, since it's a Halloween episode. What are your favorite spooky, scary, Halloween-themed video games?
Well, for me, since I'm considerably more wiser than my younger brother.
Again, with the head, like, how can you say that?
Yeah. The one that I remember when I was younger was definitely the Friday the 13th game on Nintendo. It's made by LJN. It was actually
That's a terrible game.
It was a horrible game, but being a kid, that scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
They had the music going in, and when Jason Voorhees was coming.
Yeah.
And you're more than likely you're going to die. So that scared the crap out of me when I played that as a kid. And
at that point, it's all imagination, right? So, I mean, let's like preface that, like, video games back then versus video games now. That was all imagination, because as you could tell, not realistic whatsoever. Maybe, I don't know, back then, did you think it was realistic? Did you think it was like...
No, well, I mean, the graphic fidelity was enough to where you could see what's going on. But yeah, I mean, you had to, this is the thing with technology, okay? The more technology you have, and some people might hate this, but the more technology you have available, the less creative that you have to be. That's my opinion. Because if you have less technology available, you got to be really, really creative in how you can bring the gamers into this world. And the way that the Friday 13th game did it was, to me, music.
Yeah.
I mean, they program you to know that whenever they play the Jason Voorhees music, you better, you automatically get scared and your frame of mind changes. Even though the graphics sucked and it was the same gameplay over and over, you had a sense of fear.
And that's one of, like, the strengths that they drew from the movies even, right? So, like, a lot of classic horror movies, it's all about the theme, and when you hear it, you know instantly. And so they definitely, there's a great medium to transition the same, I guess, style of scare right into the video game. Because even then, like, yeah, the graphics may not have been good, but at least the music could at least somewhat be, resemble the actual, like, movie themes.
Yes, and another Nintendo game, and this is kind of weird because it really wasn't scary, but it was, okay? And the one I'm talking about is Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. Because in that game, you knew it was going to turn nighttime. And when it turned nighttime, new creatures came out.
You're picking, like, these notoriously bad games.
I actually enjoyed Simon's Quest. I really did. I mean, even though the puzzles made no sense.
Yeah.
But when it turned nighttime, you knew that, number one, these new creatures, stronger creatures were going to come out. And then number two, you're not going to be able to kill them as fast as you were in the daytime. So you don't feel safe.
Yeah.
And so Simon's Quest did that really well. Once again, being creative, and then they program you to think, okay, when it's nighttime, you suddenly change the mood that you are. Whereas the first Castlevania, it was more action oriented. There definitely weren't horror elements in it, but I didn't get that same sense of fear that I did when I played Simon's Quest. You know,
Yeah,
so those are the two.
So it seems like as developers back then, when they're able to introduce some kind of uncertainty into like the gameplay, right? Because when things start to get predictable, you know what's gonna happen. You're not scared.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess just looking into different techniques on how to introduce that. Yeah, and to take away your power at that too, right? So like the weaker you seem, the more powerless you seem. It's like you just immediately, I guess. Yeah, just afraid you're not strong, right?
Yeah, and if I talk about the quote unquote newer generation, I mean it's pretty much simple. Resident Evil.
Well, I would say that's kind of like a mid. I mean, so yeah, as we transition, there's a few more games I do want to talk about before we jump into that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a game called Clock Tower for Super Nintendo. Again, this is like in a 32-bit era, so the graphics, were noticeably better than Nintendo, but they still relied on a lot of like, predictability, and making you feel helpless and powerless, and to immerse you in that game. I think they did like a lot of what makes horror good at its most basic element. They had to rely on graphic fidelities and things like that. And so even now, if I were to go back and play that, I would still probably be scared. Actually, just thinking about
that's scary. And Silent Hill, that was pretty scary.
Yeah, and I think more of these is like it does get more into your head a little bit, right? It's more like the psychological kind of horror where you never know like when this guy is gonna come up. So like the whole thing in Clock Tower, it's kind of like a point and click game in a sense, where you move from point to point by clicking on it, like telling where your character to go. But the thing with that is like the protagonist is, I believe his name was Scissorman, and the way the game worked, and the way the game worked is like you would never know when he would come up, right? So you'd be walking into your room, go back, walk in, back, and it's just kind of random in his appearance. And the only thing you could do is just really hide, and it creates for a very tense moment when you're hiding and you don't know if he's gonna come find you or not, So
yeah, that game was scary though.
yeah, I still don't want to play it. But I'm kind of a big pansy in that kind of sense in scary games.
I do want to mention one that I forgot. TurboGrafx 16 Splatterhouse.
Yeah, that's a side scroller game, right? The kind of arcadey beat 'em up.
Yeah, with Jason Voorhees looking like it was an arcade game. Namco. That one was a really, really cool action game. And it was scary too, but in a different way. It was scary more like, man, I'm gonna bash your head in, because the monsters just look crazy,
And
it was just a weird experience.
Yeah, and at that time, maybe it's like kind of like the rise of like the visual fidelity, right? Like some of these, it's just gory, right? And kind of like surprising and kind of like a shock factor. Like, oh man, like that guy's like my head just blew up. Like, oh.
Yeah, and when I first saw Splatterhouse, honestly, I've never seen anything like that prior to it. And like you said, the fidelity, when you hit that monster and it splat on the wall, or when you see a monster with guts hanging out of it and maggots coming out of their body, it was just a different experience,
Yeah, and so, as we like chronicle like the change in horror games, so going back to NES is more about like your imagination getting to your head, right? In the 1632-bit era, it becomes a little more, like the visual fidelity is a little better, so you still get a little bit scared from that. And so the next era we're going to step into is like the PlayStation, Nintendo 64, where we're getting like these 3D polygons and these 3D models. So like you mentioned, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, those were definitely revolutionary for a time because it was realistic, at least at that point, like fairly realistic. And so they could scare you.
We're going in. And now we're going into the VR space where it's even more important now with the fidelity, of the graphics, the sound, and everything else. But once again, like I said earlier, when you have so much technology, like things become cookie cutter. Like this, this Friday, whatever, Five Nights at Freddy, that was a unique idea, and it's not graphically impressive at all.
Exactly.
And so, so the VR experience, that's going to be a whole different experience.
But let's step it back for a second though. So let's continue to kind of like progress, So like when we're in the PlayStation, Nintendo 64 era, like the graphics are better. And we can even talk about Resident Evil and Silent Hill a little bit, right? So these are survival horror games where basically, I guess it's like they started to introduce a lot more jump scares into these games. Just things popping out at you at unexpected times, but you still had like a sense of power because you did have weapons, but they're kind of limited. And so that's where like the term survival horror comes from. Like you have to survive, you have to make the best use of your resources, right? And it's not a cakewalk by any means. You gotta make sure like some enemies you have to run from, some enemies you can kill, and it's also an adventure at that point too, because you're exploring this mansion, you're figuring out like the secrets behind these places, and it's not really like character driven. I mean, actually, I take that back. It is a bit character driven in Resident Evil because you have a lot of different players, personalities in the game, but it's kind of coming to you all at once. You need to like progress, you need to survive, you need to be watch out and be careful not die. At the same time, you're getting scared, but I think it follows like a horror movie kind of like really well. When you're thrown in that kind of situation, like you need to have like the courage and strength to keep on pushing forward. And if you're idle for too long, you're gonna die.
Yeah, and that's where the fidelity with the graphical power of those machines back then, they introduced 3D spaces, and so it really did immerse you even more. And because you had this 3D space, even though the gameplay is actually linear, you felt like you were on an adventure.
It's a more cinematic experience,
Exactly, yeah. So that was, I would definitely say with the new next generation of consoles, it did lead into more storytelling, like a movie. Whereas I didn't really feel like that in the older generation. You didn't feel like you were in a movie. But with games like Resident Evil or like we just talked about, you did feel like you were part of a movie, a horror movie,
Yeah, and so like I feel like that's where that era like really excelled, putting your into the shoes of like the actual character, right?
Yeah.
And I mean they weren't all linear. Like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, they had like a ton of backtracking where you had to just like kind of go back and explore back and forth. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty classic and it was very new and revolutionary at the time. So I mean, just looking back again, like how we've seen it progress is kind of more about the immersing you like with sound, like I guess at a basic level of unpredictability, right? So that's like kind of like the baby step, and then we're starting to get more visual, like higher fidelity, more I guess like catering to like your sensations, like your visual and audio sensations. And so like the next era, it kind of like progresses like that for quite a bit. I'd say the past 2 or 3 generations has really been about the same thing, just about better graphics, better sound. And like you said before, when you have like less hardware and technology, you really have to be a lot more creative on how you design these things. And after that, I can't really think too much of. I mean, we can bring some other games up, but for the most part, it's gonna rely. At least the bulk of these games are going to rely on just the visual and audio kind of sense.
Yes.
I will say that Eternal Darkness that came out for the GameCube, though, did some pretty cool things in it. So Eternal Darkness by, I would say, Silicon Knights, I believe. It was a release title on GameCube. And it was like, kind of similar to Resident Evil, where it's kind of like a third-person, not third-person shooter, but it's like a third-person adventure game, really. A survival horror adventure game. But some cool things that they did in Eternal Darkness is they messed with your mind in a different sense, right? So they didn't rely 100% on visuals. They did some crazy things to, I guess, mess with your psyche by pretending that your GameCube reset, or pretending that your memory card was completely erased, right? It kind of breaking the fourth wall in that sense. And yeah, that hadn't really been done before, and I don't think it's really been done since. But that's just something I wanted to point out.
Yeah, I remember that game. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess some other notable horror games. You talk about Resident Evil 4. The evolution of Resident Evil went more towards the action genre. Dead Space was kind of very similar to Resident Evil. And then maybe the biggest one out of that era, I would say like another kind of revolutionary change was Amnesia, The Dark Descent, which is kind of like a return back to like you feeling very weak and powerless, because I feel like a lot of horror games, they give you a lot of control over the character and your environment, but Amnesia, it's a first-person adventure game where you can't really fight anything, and so this is kind of a mix between like great graphics, great sound, great atmosphere, but at the same time a lot of powerless, helplessness, and unpredictability. So I feel like Amnesia was a really great game just because it was able to mend both what made old horror games good and what made new horror games good. And yeah, I guess going from there, that's kind of where VR is heading, like kind of a very similar thing to really immerse you. But at the same time, if like I would say like the first hit VR game would be not only one that immerses you, at least a horror VR game that's gonna be critically acclaimed is one that's gonna immerse you, but at the same time draw on those like old horror genres for it to have legs, you know, for it to be classic rather than just the latest jump scare game.
I would say Outlast, and then the sequel Outlast 2 just came out, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and those are popular, right? But again, those are kind of, at least to me, stale and predictable because they're just jump scare games, you know. Those are very linear, you're just walking, then something, pops out at you.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where VR is at right now because it is such a new technology. But we'll see how the newest Resident Evil, the VR experience, let's see how they do that. I mean, we keep going back to Resident Evil because, man, they've just been around so long, you know, and it's still a very highly valued property. Yeah, it's changed.
Yeah, they've changed a lot.
I still think that Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 4, those are high watermarks, and also Code Veronica on the Dreamcast. That was everything.
Yeah, I mean, for different reasons, right? So I would say Resident Evil 1 was because it was very revolutionary at the time. Resident Evil 4 because it was just a masterpiece of an action game.
Great story, too.
Yeah. Code Veronica, that was kind of like the pinnacle. And I think that's like, at that point, like the most and best it can do with the original Resident Evil formula, right? So that was like the polished, that was like the polished experience, right? The classic but polished experience. And then they started changing, and then Resident Evil 4 was more action oriented. Resident Evil 5 even more so. Resident Evil 6 was not very highly regarded.
No.
And so now they're kind of returning back to their roots, going back to kind of style in the first Resident Evil about being more survival horror. And so, yeah, like I had mentioned, if they can meld the VR aspect, the visual aspect, with like what made the old games great, it's definitely going to be a hit.
Yep. It's going to be kind of crazy to see gaming with VR horror games where it goes in the future. I don't play them. I don't like horror too much, so I can easily see people just really getting scared.
Yep. Yeah, we'll see what kind of medical conditions come out of that. Whether it's kind of like PTSD or actual like, you know, physical like damage because I don't know your heart's beating too fast or something like that. But not for the faint of heart. And maybe we'll see kind of something like it becomes kind of standard and acceptable, you know, and people aren't scared by that anymore, and they need like, I don't know, another kind of experience to scare them. But we'll see. And for the most part, I feel like a lot of VR is just very still kind of like tech demos, right? They're still feeling the space out of what makes a great VR game.
Yep.
So yeah.
I mean, I personally, for VR, I cannot wait till they get a really, really amazing RPG in VR. Like I'm going back to Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3. You know, like if they could do something like that in a VR space, man, I'm there. You know, I'm there.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of reasons why we play different games and why we have like our favorite genre is because of the immersion factor, right? So to you, like you said, RPG, you love being that character, you love role playing and having that adventure, you know. So yeah, it would be very interesting to see how VR they incorporate that and just make like it that much more immersive. You know, whereas like a first person shooter or a horror game, right? So VR, you definitely gotta take different approaches to it for each kind of genre on how to make it immersive. So like, you know, maybe in horror, if they can make you feel trapped and helpless, maybe that's like really the factors that they want to aim for. For RPG, maybe if they want to make things seem like on a grand scale, right? Maybe that's the way they need to go. And then for first person shooters, maybe for the combat to feel very visceral, you know, to have like punches to it every time you fire a gun. And yeah, I guess we'll just see how developers really try to achieve those types of sensations when you're playing in VR.
Yep. It'll be interesting for sure. Yeah, I mean, so if, for all you horror fans out there, you're probably gonna love it, in the VR world.
Yep. Okay, so then the other half of our video game segment is just talking about the current state of microtransaction. And there's always, I say that because there's always going to be a current state. I don't think it's ever going to go away. Is it going to get any better or worse? I think it'll kind of just continue along the path as it is now, where some people love it, some people hate it, right? So about today's microtransactions, we can talk about some of the games that have been recently released or will be released very soon and kind of their take on it. So I believe Titanfall 2 actually released, and if you don't know, Titanfall was kind of by the guys who made the original Call of Duty 4, Infinity Ward. They branched off, did their own company, and their first game, Titanfall, was kind of like a first-person shooter mixed with a bunch of mechs. And yeah, so Titanfall 2, their sequel, came out to that. I heard reviews were pretty good on it, but one of the most notable things I want to talk about is the fact that all their feature content is going to be free of charge. That is, all maps, all modes, all characters, whatever. I'm pretty sure it's going to be mostly free, maybe save for cosmetic items, right? But, a lot of people have been crying out for that. At least the vocal minority are like your hardcore gamers, who are on internet forums, who really are passionate about gaming. Whereas you have your other crowd of people who are kind of the more casual players who don't really care about that. They're willing to spend money in their game, and they're voting with their wallets. And so, I guess what is your take when we have like these two different segments of people, of some who are very against it and some who don't even care or don't even, maybe not that knowledgeable about it?
Well, I think that, just like we talked about earlier, monetizing your platform, it's evolving. And I think what Microsoft Studios is doing with Titanfall 2, I think that's where the industry is going to be heading. Whereas don't pop up all this monetization in my face, make it part of the game. And I think with Titanfall 2, the way they're doing it, you're playing the game, you're still enjoying the game. You're still getting all the main benefits of the game. And then, like you said, if it's like skin packs or different costumes or different mechs, then I don't mind spending money on that. It's not intruding in on the game,
Right.
Whereas a lot of modern games, I wouldn't say a lot, but
quite
a bit of them.
A lot.
Yeah, especially mobile games.
Yeah.
They intrude in on the gaming experience. I don't want to have to play my game, whether it's on my phone, on my computer, or whatever, and every few minutes there's an ad or there's a DLC or something, and it stops me from enjoying the game, and that just, it's not a good gaming experience. And I think with what Titanfall 2 is doing, they're doing it really smart. That's where you want to go, where it's not bad for you. It makes sense for you to buy these other things,
Right. Yeah, I mean, we say that, from our perspective, but at the end of the day, it's money talking.
Yeah, and I think the money is telling them that this type of interaction, it's not working. And that's why I think more companies are going to go this other route in the future.
I mean, we say that, but I think I'm starting to see the opposite. Call of Duty is actually going towards more microtransaction now. So if you guys didn't know, the latest Call of Duty, I think Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, you can buy stats for your guns. You can upgrade your guns with, microtransactions or real money. I'm pretty sure you can still get these upgrades by just playing the game long enough. But this is for people who don't want to spend time, don't mind shelling out $5 here, $10 there to get the immediate effects of a better gun, right? I guess that immediate satisfaction.
Yeah.
And so,
but I see that makes sense, though.
What, I'm sorry.
I mean, I'm thinking that makes sense. Like it's just like a Titanfall 2 thing where it doesn't stop you from playing the game. If you want to take a shortcut, you can.
Well, it is, because people who are playing the game, like any noob player can just go and spend money and then automatically, be better than you objectively because they have a better gun with better stats, and that's frustrating. And it's like a huge pinnacle, or it's like a huge point of contention in a lot of multiplayer games. When games are quote unquote pay to win, the hardcore gamers don't gravitate towards that because it's not fair. It's not, competitive. Because anyone could just go out and buy the best gun, and then just
Yeah, and I think they're testing the waters, my opinion. Okay, because if there's a huge backlash from especially the hardcore community that does this competitively, they play regularly, it is cheating. Somebody grinded to get to level 60, and then somebody else paid a good sum of money, and now they're at your same level, yeah, they're going to be turned off by that. But I think these companies know that, so they're going to see how many people actually pay for this, and also how it affects the gaming community. You know, like with whatever releases that they have. You know,
and
so they're just testing it.
And in this sense, to me, it's like the publishers who are trying to make like the investors happy, right? Like they can't have their cake and eat it too. You can't cater to both audiences, right? So to me, it's a lot about going where the money is. But I feel like some companies are really bad about this. Some companies are, they know about it and they're partaking in it, but at least they try to work around it a little bit. So take for example, Rockstar, Grand Theft Auto 5, Red Dead Redemption.
Yeah.
So Grand Theft Auto 5 was a single player experience, was pretty critically acclaimed. It did really well reviews for all like the single player content, but at the same time, like that's not where the money came from that game. The money all came from online. That thing made like ridiculous amounts of money, and as much as you hear people complain about it, about the ability to spend money to basically just unlock stuff without spending time to get it. Yeah, a lot of people, they have negative backlash about it, but it doesn't stop it. Like there are some people who are willing to pay money, and these are going to be your more casual users. So and
I think that's why they're testing. If more of the masses pay for it, then the hardcore is not going to matter.
But that's the frustrating part. It's because that's where gaming came from. It's from the passionate hardcore, and when they stop catering to you, it's like selling out in a sense, right? The original things that made games great, they started to go away, and when you're targeting that the mass consumers, a lot of things that you love about the game just fade away.
Yeah, but you could say that in a lot of industries. Technology industry, guess where all the money's made? It's in the mass consumers. It's not in the hardcore. Like take smartphones. Why do people buy so many iPhones? It's not because of the technology. It's because they have the most mass appeal. They have the best branding. And the same thing goes with the laptops. And people are buying it because it has mass appeal.
But the difference,
the hardcore is very small.
Yeah, but the difference in this scenario is that like it's not a frustrating experience for the hardcore people. They're not getting gypped. They're not getting short. They're not sold short. It doesn't affect them as much, and it's not as frustrating. Like for example, everyone like iPhone, like it doesn't take anything away from you. Like it doesn't. I mean, you could argue they took away the headphone jack and things like that, but those are like small, minute things. Whereas like the gameplay, it's like 100% about the experience that you have with it, right?
Yeah, I don't really think it matters. I mean, in my opinion, because if you look at we talk about this a lot. Esports is going to become more and more mainstream, right? So, I mean, all of these things are, in the end, these businesses have to appeal to the masses because that's who's going to be spending the most money. So, they're always going to be the hardcore niche of every single business, every single platform. But in the end, you have to appeal to the masses. That's just my opinion. I mean, it's going to happen,
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, if the mass is going to pay more money than you, then you're not part of the equation anymore.
Right, but then it just kills off everything that you invested and what you loved about gaming in the first place. I mean,
well, from a gamer, from the end user, you're right, but not from the company.
I mean, yes and no, because what if this is like a quick cash grab, right? And then what if they find out like their strategy doesn't have legs? Take example Zynga, right? They they pretty much double down, and eventually they're starting to go under just because of I guess how short-lived their monetization profit was. It wasn't sustainable.
But every businesses go through that. I mean, otherwise, why would they produce so many Call of Duties? Why would they produce so many Super Mario Brothers? Why would they produce so many Castlevanias? Because they're still making money out of them. So as much as we like to think that we, as the consumer, have all the control, we really don't. It's based upon supply and demand. So if this works for them, they're going to supply more.
Well, I'm talking more of bursting the bubble, right? So Mario games, they sell because of the actual gameplay content, but when you start to strip that away and you're just like I mentioned, doing these quick cash grabs, it may work for a short term, but then eventually you're just going to be a shell of what kind of made that game great in the first place.
Yeah, I really disagree with that because smart businesses, they test out a lot of things. Like even if you go to the Mario or any of these franchises, not all of them were hits. And so they'll learn from the ones that didn't do well, and then they'll produce another one, until it just completely makes no more money before.
I mean, rationally,
like Zynga, that's a good example.
Like rationally thinking, you think most companies, like, why do you do this? Like if I can kind of understand and make the decision, like, why can't you, like, bigwigs at this corporation do it? But you take a look at, like, Ubisoft, for example. They release Assassin's Creed games, Far Cry games, like, every year, right? For maybe about the past 6, 7, 8 years. But now they're recently stopping, right? Because they figured out, like, this isn't worth it. Like, it worked for a couple years, but, how long can you, keep doing that? And maybe, like, a lot of companies would be under this false pretense of, like, oh yeah, this is going to be sustainable. But in all reality, like, in the next 3 or 4 years, like what happened to Ubisoft, like, oh yeah, this strategy isn't working out at all. And I feel like gaming is pretty volatile in the sense that I don't think you have a lot of room to fail, at least for a very long time.
Yeah, I disagree with that because if you think about game development, it's not something that they produced just last month or last year. These games, they have people who predict where the industry is going years ahead. If you think about a Final Fantasy game or a Call of Duty, that took years to develop that game before it's even available. So they know where the industry is heading. They have a lot of data.
I disagree with that actually. Like, I don't know. You can like bet huge, and like a lot of video game companies go down like under really quickly. So I mean, you could be like riding the latest trend, but I don't know. To me, it's a fickle market because sometimes like the consumers don't know what they want, right? And sometimes like you just gotta wait for a game to come out and then people love it. But you can't. I don't think you can anticipate it.
No, but that's why they release a lot of things. That's why they have so many DLCs. So they have so many things that they're doing. At least the successful ones to gain a lot of data over time. It's like if you think about Activision, they don't just have Call of Duty. And they just don't have one Call of Duty game. They have a lot of other properties. They have a lot of things that go along with it, So, like, some companies, they do go under, right away, okay? Like Zynga, how long was that going to last, But they didn't do anything to improve their situation.
Right.
So, I mean, I just think that's just business,
Okay, so, I mean, like, maybe not going to extremes of companies going under, but let's take a look at World of Warcraft, for example, right? Like, I guess month over month, subscriber numbers keep on dropping, right? And you would think that, like, having a game for that long, they would have all the data to understand what the players want and what they're going for. But, sometimes you just get burnout. And maybe that's what I'm trying to lean more towards. It's like, in video game industry, it's very easy to burn out. I mean, there's some stuff that's proven classic over time, like, Mario, but they don't release a new Mario every single year, right? Whereas Call of Duty, they release it every single year. And, at some point, to me, it's like, eventually, like, you can't bank on some of this stuff anymore. Like, whether or not it's like, releases like, fewer and further in between, or just trying a different approach. Like,
but that happens though. I mean, if you think about World of Warcraft, how long has it been around? The original World of Warcraft, it was a top-down game, and I remember playing that. I think it's 1991 or something, 1993. That's a long time for that property to still be profitable, And
I'm not talking about like the property itself. I'm talking about World of Warcraft, not like the Warcraft franchise.
The MMO. I mean, they knew it was going down. So now, okay, if that doesn't work anymore, they're gonna do something else. It might not be a World of Warcraft. It might be something else. And once again, Blizzard is part of Activision.
But look at their recent offerings, right? StarCraft 2 is, as far as like, it used to be the esports titan, and now it gets less and less popular every single day. Hearthstone, the same thing. It's going more towards like that pay to win. And Overwatch, from a competitive sense, it's okay, but like even companies like as big as Blizzard is, Blizzard's huge and they've renowned for making amazing games, but even sometimes they're struggling to keep up too. And you mentioned, they have like all this data, and like you can't predict some of the, like, these trends in the gaming industry.
No, I mean, but that's normal though. No business is completely insulated from it. Otherwise, you would only have to one product or service and just not do anything else.
Earlier, you were saying like, oh, they have all this data. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, they do.
And I'm saying it's fickle. Like,
oh no, I mean, but they have that data too. But what I'm saying is, they can sustain their success longer because they have a lot more data. They have a lot more metrics than somebody say like Zynga. They betted everything on one gaming franchise and they didn't do anything different. They didn't do anything that was valuable. You know, I mean, but it can happen to any company. But the likelihood of a big company that has a lot of data, that has a lot of experience releasing different products and services, them going under is a lot less likely than something like a Zynga, which is a startup.
I mean,
and they really didn't have anything else beyond that one property.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's like a lot less likely. I mean, you could say about like most big companies, but like the difference here, what I'm saying is like they could be just like burning it out, and there's gonna be some point where I think like they don't know what to do after it's burnt out.
Yeah, but that's happened over history. If you talk about gaming, there's been so many big gaming companies that you thought would never go out of business, but they did. Okay, but that's a business problem. That's not a gaming problem. You know, they just did not adjust, and they didn't create things that were valuable.
I mean, that is a gaming problem then. Okay, because like say like the current state of video games, like say it's very stale, right? Oh, the next FPS, oh, the next MMORPG. Like there's no new innovation, right? So you still need that to, I don't know, like at some point to like forward the industry.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, they did. If you're a company and you don't anticipate change, and more importantly, you don't adjust accordingly, because trends change, technologies change. I mean, if that wasn't the case, people would still be playing side scrollers on 2D sprites. You know, so all those things change. It's just when I think about it, I think about the fact that it's still business at the end of the day. You have to adjust and adapt, and the companies with the most data, the companies that can anticipate trends, they're going to last longer. You know, I mean, if you think about Activision, they've been around since the late 70s. You know, very few game companies have lasted that long. If you think about Nintendo, but then if you think about other companies like Sega, what happened to them? You know, they used to be the big boys, right? One of the big ones. Now they're software producer, and they're not really even on the top echelon of software producers anymore as well. You know, and Konami's been around forever, but they're really not a gaming company anymore neither. And so, but they're still around because they adjusted and adapted, although they're not where they used to be. So the same thing can happen to any of these companies, you know. So I mean, my feeling is the gamers themselves, they're not as big as you would think they are in determining where things are going to be heading. Okay, they're just one data point in it. You know, that's my opinion. You know, and you could look at the companies that are still around and the companies that have fallen. You know, it wasn't because of the gamers; it's because they did not adjust to things that were happening in the gaming industry.
Well, I mean, to me, it doesn't make sense because the gamers are the ones buying the games, right? So like. I mean,
no, but I mean, I think there's a misconception that the gamers themselves, the hardcore gamers, they're the ones who set the trends for the gaming industry, and they're the ones who should be the most important thing when it comes to gaming decisions by these gaming companies, but they're not. You know, I think the most important thing is the mass consumers because they make the most money for them. So, I mean, if you think about all the games that are released, even if you think you're a hardcore gamer, well, with Call of Duty now, there's a lot of people playing it, not just hardcore gamers. And you need that. Mario, there's a lot of people playing it. They appeal to the masses. You know, when they first came out, they probably didn't. You know, when Call of Duty first came out, I think it probably only appealed to the hardcore shooters because they saw this new game, you know, or even Counter-Strike, you know. But if you look at the very first Super Mario, when it first came out, nobody knew about that, you know? I mean, but now everybody knows.
But so. It does, you know, like the hardcore gamers still do matter because they're the ones who paved the way. They recognize like that game was great, and then from there, like it went mainstream, right? So like.
What I'm saying is I'm not saying that they don't matter. I'm just saying as time goes on, they aren't the most important factor because the mass consumers are the most important factor. I mean, they're the ones paying the bills.
But at the same time, you still need them to be interested and for them to like kind of be like the early adopters for the next big thing, because without them you're not going to know. And then like for example, like what happens when the mass consumers get tired and get burnt out too, and then like what do you have? You have nothing at that point. So
well, my opinion is there's always going to be the hardcore, and my opinion is the hardcore, whether it's gaming, whether it's technology, they are definitely the first adopters, and they're definitely what companies are going to use first to get the ideas, and then from then on, then it goes to the masses. That's how it's always going to work. The hardcore is always going to be the ones where they can see trends and stuff first, usually. And then they'll make it, in order for the companies to grow and to sustain their business, first get the ideas from the hardcore, whatever field that might be, and then secondly, sell to the masses. That's how you make money. So that's why I'm saying the hardcore is not that they're not important. They are, but they're not as important in the whole scheme of like making money and keeping your business running.
I mean,
they're great for ideas and testing, but they're not like who you're going to focus on the most. Otherwise, if you look at just any of these industries, what do they appeal to the most? Do they appeal to the hardcore the most, that small niche, or do they appeal to the masses?
Yeah.
In every instance, they're always going to appeal to the masses.
And I'm not saying like, they should appeal like to every need of the hardcore gamer. I know you have to have a trade-off between like what makes a good game and what's going to be, marketable and sellable to the mass consumers. But, I'm just saying, I think at some point, like, when they just get burned too many times, it's like, I just don't want there to be like a carrot, on a short stick, right? So like all these developers can be chasing like the same kind of strategy, that was proven successful for one, but didn't really work out for other people. So like you take a look at MMOs, right? Like nothing has really come close in touching World of Warcraft, but many people have tried, and you could argue like, yeah, World of Warcraft was proven, right? It appealed to the hardcore and the casual gamers, but like why has no other MMO been able to touch it? I mean, because there's only so much room for like that kind of game, right? And I think the same goes for like, like these games are like, what I'm gonna like be considering stale or like, pay to win. Like you can only have so many of it before like the bubble bursts, right? And so my concern is like if every developer, if every publisher is chasing that same strategy, a lot of them are gonna fall short. So
yeah, I mean, like I keep going back to that. Trends change, technologies change. I mean, if that was the case, I'd still be on my Commodore. I remember all the hardcore people who were very first to have a Commodore. They felt special. They felt elite. But over time, technology moved on, and they were no longer the hardcore. And then the Nintendo Entertainment System came out. I was part of the original Atari. We were the hardcore. And then the Nintendo Entertainment System came, and then Sega Masters. And so it's just natural. I mean, there's no way that you could keep one mode of thinking or staying with one trend. It's just always constantly changing. Cool. And the hardcore is always going to change with.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like if these companies are going to consistently be doing like microtransactions, like I don't know, you got to change it up at some point.
And they are changing. I mean, like Titanfall 2, that's a good example, right?
But that's how it used to be. So it's kind of like I don't know.
And even mobile games. I mean, some of the mobile games that are playing out, they don't have as many ads like popping in my face as they used to. Or even platforms like Snapchat, like we talked about earlier. That is a way different experience than what I was experiencing on Facebook or even back before MySpace. It's a different experience. Or even your internet browsing experience. It's not the same as it was even a few years ago. You remember all the clickable ads, pop-ups everywhere. You don't really see that much anymore, pop-up ads everywhere, because things have changed, and so I'm not sure there really is no answer for the whole developers versus gamers or whatever, but I just really think it's just natural. It's trends change, people's tastes change, companies change, so some things will remain classic, but that's rare, like the Mario franchise. I don't think that's ever going to be old. I mean, hopefully not, so.
I mean, I don't know. Like, to me, the concerning thing is, like, when the industry becomes stale as a whole, right? Where, like, we don't get a lot of new innovations or new ideas. It becomes more and more boring. And eventually, like, you may have, like, a video game crash, right?
That's already happened before.
I know it's happened a few times, but, it's just... It's something, like, I don't know, just trying to avoid. I mean, I know, like, and at best, for us, we can only, like, really vote with our money, so...
Yeah. I mean, it's already happened before. Gaming crashed in the 1980s, Atari. But guess what? Who came over and took their place? Nintendo. Gaming changed with Nintendo and the different types of games, the different quality. And then there was the Nintendo versus Sega, and Sega became the big dog.
But I guess as a consumer, it just like I don't want to go through that. Like even if it's like for 2, 3, 4, really 5 years. I mean, I'm not saying it's like. I'm not saying like video games are gonna be gone forever. That's never gonna happen. But and it will bounce back in some way, form, or fashion. But just I guess being able to avoid it and just to keep it fresh But
one thing that you mentioned about like you made me really think about Titanfall 2 and the microtransactions and the way that they're selling additional services. What are the trends that you see in gaming that actually make sense? Like I mean, like you mentioned GTA and so forth, but what would make sense to you as a gamer that wouldn't turn you off on it?
Okay, sure. And I think that's what I want to talk about in the first place before we kind of got into our our opinions that kind of were dissenting. But I feel like Rockstar does a pretty okay job at it. I'm not into like the online multiplayer, but as long as they can deliver both a single player experience, that's really good. And if they want to like target their online to the more casual players, I'm fine with that, right? Because as a hardcore gamer, I'm getting the part that I want. They're not making any compromises, right? They're giving you both, like the best. They're having their cake and eating it too, right?
Yeah.
So I'm okay with that. With Titanfall, I feel like the reason they're not going DLC is because of their niche. It's gonna be like the hardcore gamers, and that's like where they're gonna get the most sales to me. Like I don't think most casual people are gonna be super interested in Titanfall. They are advertising pretty crazy, like so I was at Buffalo Wild Wings the other day and they had like a bunch of advertising for that. And so to me it's like just being even slightly refreshing is gonna turn people on to it, So I feel like in their position, yeah, I think that's the right thing to do. Call of Duty, I don't expect them to change, I don't play Call of Duty. Single player was never really good after Call of Duty 4, at least to me.
Yeah, initial reviews for the new Call of Duty aren't that great.
Exactly, and see, that's the part where it's running into burnout, and like when you add microtransactions on top of that, like what if it turns even more people off, right? And then you could say, like, they've had the data, they release the game year over year, but if they're still continuing to like put out a subpar product, like just gets worse over time, to me, that tells me you're not appealing to the hardcore, you're not appealing to like the mass consumers, and at that point you're just doing it wrong. You need to like rethink.
Yeah, they're lazy. So
Okay, yeah.
When it stops printing cash, then they're gonna change.
Yeah, of course.
If not, they'll go under.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like even like these big companies, like to me, like I don't know, you would think that they would change the Call of Duty, like, and people year after year, like maybe they'll. Well, actually, it's come to the point where like no one expects it to change, and that's the part that concerns me. That they're not making any positive changes. They're not even trying to like I don't know. It's not sustainable. It just keeps going. It gets like a little worse and worse every year.
I can agree with that. I mean, there's certain franchises that I really used to love, but they just didn't do anything that was different. Right. They kept putting out the same stuff every year. Yeah. I stopped buying it.
Yeah. So I mean, I kind of disagree with the Call of Duty franchise in a whole on those points. I'm sure there's still fun games to play online, and like the formula is really good. It's classic, right? It's fun. It's enjoyable. That's why so many people buy them, and it doesn't get old too quickly. But there's gonna be a point where it does get old eventually, and so maybe it's starting to head that way. So I'm not really a big fan of like the way Activision handles that. And Blizzard is owned by Activision too, so. Overwatch, I think, was good. Basically, you just buy the base game, you get all your heroes, and you don't have to buy anything. There's no disadvantages from spending money in a game, or advantages or disadvantages from spending money in a game. The only other pretty crazy thing that so I guess there's like a few different camps, right? Like offer the content for free, offer it by unlocking it by playing for long enough, offering the ability to just get it instantly with real money, offering the unlock to get you like better stats, and then there's a new one that we mentioned before. It's like the Hitman game. It's episodic content, yeah, and that hasn't really worked out too well in the past. There's been a few games that have success with it. For example, the Walking Dead point and click adventure game, and yeah, I heard the new Hitman game was doing pretty at least well enough to warrant continued episodic releases, and they're actually doing a season 2. So to me, if they did the old, and this is the part where you mentioned where like these companies need to change and experiment. This is a positive example of changing, experimenting, because I think at that point, if they released another Hitman game at the full $60 price point, I don't think a lot of people would have bought it. So they were smart enough to actually, and they're willing to experiment. So I'm pretty happy about that, and the fact that they found out what works for them. So there's no one right answer. Even as like a hardcore gamer, it depends on a lot. It depends on your franchise, what your players are into, And like I said, like it's really hard to predict, and the market is fickle for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I hope that, with all these technologies, and I know it's already been happening, but I hope it happens more, that there's more indie games coming out. That's my hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want more indie games that caters to the gamers, because, it's understandable. These companies spend millions, especially like big games like Call of Duty.
Mm-hmm.
Their investment's so high, they really, quote unquote, can't take a lot of risk business-wise. Otherwise they could lose tons and tons of money.
I don't think it's losing money, because I would feel like the investment for Call of Duty is actually fairly small because it's the same game, right? They're not spending any money on making it any better.
No, I mean, it's expensive. I mean, if you compare a Call of Duty game, what's their cost? Over $100-something million. That's a lot of money.
For development costs, I don't think so, because they're using the same engine. The assets are going to be the same. They're not doing anything new with it.
Well, it's not just technology.
It's going to be an advertising cost. I
understand
it's
distribution. That. All the costs as a whole. Just think about it's similar to the movie industry. They're investing so much money. That's why the movies that you see, they're not really different, because they can't, quote unquote, take those risks and be creative because there's so much money involved in it. And so. Similar thing is happening. It has to happen to gaming.
I get that, but the thing is, like, they feel like they're locked into that mentality, where.
Well, they don't have a choice. I mean, it's business. You're spending that much money. If you can't double or triple your return on investment, then obviously you're not going to do a lot of different things. Until the franchise starts not earning money. Then you're going to have to take risks.
But by then, it's going to be a little too late. I mean, at least to me.
Well, it depends. I mean, look at the Hitman series. That's a perfect example. It's been around a long time. They saw that things were getting stale, and so they released an episodic thing, whereas the main game is still pretty much the same, so you're not turning off a lot of the gamers who are used to it, right? But you're introducing something new.
But the Hitman series, they didn't wait until it failed, because their last game actually sold really well. Was it critically acclaimed? Not really, but it sold. It made its money back.
What I'm saying is you're not going to wait until they run out of money. If you're stupid, you will. But if you're a smart company, no, you won't. You see that you're trending, it's not making as much money, so you're going to try a few different things along the way, like that Hitman I was just talking about. So,
I don't know. I mean, it's just a different mentality between each company has their strategy, right, and how they want to approach things.
Well, go ahead.
I get like the big business aspect of it, right? Like Activision, they're just trying to get their as much money back on it as possible. I feel like because they're taking the safe route, or at least what they think is safe. But to me, eventually, it's not going to be safe. And
yeah, we'll see. Because I mean, even with this recent Call of Duty, they're trying it out in space. Mm-hmm. That's quote unquote different than the other way, except for the Modern Warfare. But we'll see how this goes out. Or even the recent Battlefield 1. They're going back to the what is it, like the 1940s or something?
20s. It's WW1.
Yeah, 1920s. Yeah. So they're they are trying things. It's just that it's not as fast, and it's not as I would say as relatable as it's not going to move as quickly as the gaming community, in my opinion, because it takes so much time. There's so much money. However, that's why I'm like really said I hope that the indie scene grows faster, and that more people with these technologies, they can produce games faster, because then you'll have more, just like content creation, you could put up new YouTube videos every single day and it would be quote unquote fresh.
Yeah. I mean,
so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back, my main concern is like when you're pushing the industry in the wrong direction, a lot of these companies are getting into like the microtransaction hype train. It makes money, but I mean, it's making money now in the short term, right? But I'm just concerned for the long term effect of things, and so that's really my biggest issue with it. I don't care. Yeah, I don't care if you do it, because like I'm not playing those games anyways. But when it comes to the point where like, it happens to everyone, like everyone's forced, to kind of like come into contact with these experiences, then that's when, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's when you might not be a gamer anymore, but that happens.
When we compare it to the movie industry, right? Like we were talking about burnout on these huge Hollywood films and all these superhero movies. It's the same thing, right? So like, at least for us, there's like a ton of different I would say there's like more offerings, right, where it's indie or whatnot. It's similar in that fashion because like I don't know. Eventually, it's like I'm not gonna want to go to the movie theaters anymore, and I have to go somewhere else to get it. So maybe that's why you're really pro for the indie games because it's the same sentiment, right? You don't care about like the huge AAA action games or movies. You just want to play like I guess what appeals to you. But to me, it's not quite there at the level of movies yet, where there's as much choice and variety.
Yeah, I think there's more variety in gaming than movies because in movies you're very restricted to certain genres, whereas in gaming it's so many different genres and subgenres. I really think the technology and especially the internet, it can foster more creativity. I've seen more different types of unique ideas because of the internet technologies than I did back then. And back then, you didn't have that many options. Like if you were a gamer in the 80s, what did you have? You had Atari still, but nobody's playing it. But you had Nintendo and Sega, and that's about it.
I mean, I guess maybe since I'm like, more primarily a gamer than a moviegoer, to me it's like I have less tolerance of when I have a bad experience with a video game. Whereas if I watch a bad movie, it's like, I don't know, like I'm not as upset about it, because it feels like to me gaming is an investment, and when I get frustrated when I invest myself, money and time, at least a movie is a pretty small barrier, price point barrier. Whereas gaming, if I buy like a $40, $50, $60 game, I'm gonna be pissed,
Yeah, and that's why I'm not a quote unquote modern gamer, because to me it's not about the game anymore, and I definitely don't want to invest $60 on a game, then another 60 on the DLC, then another 60 on an expansion pack, then another whatever for a season pass. Whereas back then I could just buy the cartridge and the whole game is completed. And I could just enjoy the game. That's why I'm not a modern gamer, But once again, trends, gamers change, everything changes. So the demographic for me, probably most of us are not playing video games like we did when we were younger. We're not spending 20, 30 hours. I remember playing Final Fantasy 2 days straight without sleeping. I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
it's changed.
Yeah, and then I guess the other concern I have is like when it starts to affect me as a gamer, where my choices are becoming more and more limited. That's when I want to draw the line, like, hey, this isn't right, So yeah.
That's when you got to go to get your Chinese KFC.
Yeah. Yes, guys, go to KFC. KFC, please sponsor us.
Well, KFC is pretty big in other countries, by the way. They're very big in China.
Yeah, it was actually I think the first fast food chain in China. The first American or Western fast food chain in China.
Yeah, and for all you people who travel around the world, a lot of companies, regardless of what country they're in, the biggest thing that they try to do is get globalized because most of their money is made around the world, especially in developing countries. And the reason why I bring that up is because I actually went to Pakistan. And in Pakistan, the two biggest industries, fast food, is Pizza Hut. And I don't think KFC was there, but Pizza Hut was huge there. And Pizza Hut is owned by PepsiCo, who also owns KFC, which is kind of weird to me, but yeah.
Yeah, I went to Britain, and actually, like, my French uncles, he loves KFC as like a straight up French command. Like, that's pretty crazy. And I remember we spent something along the lines of $60, $70 US on KFC, and I was like, this is ridiculous. Why are we paying this much for KFC?
Yeah. Depending on which country you're in some countries, McDonald's is considered gourmet food. So
I think in India that's the case.
Yeah.
Anyways.
So, I'm in agreement with you in some cases with the whole DLC and thing. I mean, I'm for me personally, I don't think I'm ever gonna agree with it because it just ruins my gaming experience. I don't enjoy it.
I mean, there's room for it, and I think that's the thing with gaming is like there's only so much room for a certain type of game, a certain type of I guess like marketing strategy or whatever, right? There's just gonna be the point where like, there's not enough room for other games or other properties to do the same thing this one does. So
I mean, me personally, I'm hoping that all these DLCs, all these additional monetization, me personally, I hope because as more and more people start to hate these things, I hope that it goes back to purely about gaming.
Yep.
I don't know if that's going to happen, but that would be a great outcome.
Yeah.
I want it to go back to gaming. I just want to play the game.
As long if it's more balanced, like the way Rockstar is saying it, single player, unintrusive. Multiplayer, if you want to do it, then do it. That's fine with me. I want my choices. I don't want to be limited. Where I'm forced into something that I don't want to do. So.
Yep.
As long as they get that balance, I don't care. Have all the microtransactions you want, as long as it doesn't affect my core experience. Anyways, that was a pretty long rant, and if you guys are still here, thank you for sticking with us. I understand if you guys went out to your local KFC.
KFC, please sponsor us.
Yes.
My brother would love to have you as a sponsor, especially
I
for
will
Chinese.
appear in your commercials. Please.
If you're watching in China, there you go. He's perfect for your advertising.
Yeah, and I hope this isn't offensive to anyone.
Yeah.
But thank you guys for tuning in for this special Halloween spooky episode. Some stuff in there. Yep. So we're gonna end it here. Let us know what you think, what you want to talk about, what you enjoyed. If you like our costumes, let us know what we should be for next year. Anyways, we're gonna cut it out here. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Kung Fu Colonel Sanders, and this is my co-host Chica.
And fried.
Yep. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in.